Please email me, Peter. Okay. Stephen asked, will the ultimate line be released for the Mac OS? The Mac is constantly undergoing a huge amount of development changes to get it essentially to the point of our professional product for PC. But I don't have a date for you on that one. There is no projected release date other than the fact that it's going to be late September. And with that, let's get started because it's a lot of questions. Okay, so today, friends, we're going to be talking about 2021. I'm going to use specifically Ultimate in this one. And then we're going to be talking about the following features because they're like visual features that are presentable to you. And they are also all features that sort of work within Ultimate. So we're going to be talking about, just to outline them first, today we're going to talk about the color picker, the color wheel, the tone wheels. We're going to do a sort of a run through on the new batch rename. I will also talk about batch resizing, text on path, text frame box, refining edges, improve watermark, improve crop, and finally develop mode, right-hand pane. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So the color picker is the first tool we're going to talk about. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up an image into edit mode, and we'll outline that tool. I'm just going to open up this image of a car here, and we'll have a look at what's going on in this image. Actually, you know, I'm going to open up this one that has, because this coincides with another tool that we're going to talk about. So the color picker itself is not necessarily new to ACDSee, but they did dramatically change the UI of it and also like where it exists within other tools. So previously, the color picker didn't exist within tools like adjustment layers, and it wasn't available in exposure and lighting and color adjustments, that sort of thing. So the color picker is super sensitive now, and actually it gives a really good representation of what color you're hovering over. So to basically bring up the color picker within edit mode, you navigate to the top here, which is listed under the eyedropper. And the color picker itself is this UI setup, which outlines essentially the RGB values of whatever individual pixel you're selecting. So in the case of this individual pixel, what we're seeing in the center of our screen here is an RGB value that has, in essence, 5 brightness of red, 87 brightness of green, and 127, or sorry, rather hues of green, red, and blue. And this is corroborated by if we just click, in this case, on one of these colors, and then bring up the actual foreground color and look at our hex values, or rather in this case, our HSB values. So while we're looking at this, we're looking at a blue that has a red value of 0, a green value of 177, and a blue value of 116. So the color picker is like way improved. The sensitivity is improved. The UI is much simpler to use. And what's really cool about this now is that when I go to open up a tool like, let's say, for example, Color EQ within the adjustment layer panel, there's this little icon that exists right here, which says, which is essentially a color picker within an adjustment layer tool. So all I did was add a color EQ adjustment layer by clicking on its icon right here. And then what we can do is we can click on this, essentially this icon, this color picker icon. And what it does is it gives us another icon to interact with over top of the image. When I increase, or when I say increase these blues, for example, it's going to increase their saturation or decrease their saturation based on whether or not I click up in this case or down. And as you can see, if you look to the right where the UI for the color EQ is, those sliders adjust accordingly, okay? As always, when you want to reset those values, you can just right click on the actual slider itself and it'll set it to its default values. But that is working within the saturation frame. This is also possible within hue or brightness. So if I wanted to take hue, for example, once again, click on this color picker adjuster and then select, in this case, the blue from our image, and then increase the hue within that range, which will ultimately just change the color of that blue, then that adjusts for that part of my image. And it'll cycle through, I guess, at the bottom, it looks like a maroon all the way to the top, which should represent, in this case, green, and then yellow, and then orange. So that is super sensitive to what's occurring in this case. Obviously, we would have to, if we wanted to be really specific about changing the hue or saturation or brightness of just the car, we'd have to interact with the mask tool itself in addition to this tool. But the actual color EQ itself is now, there's all these pickable elements that are within my image. For example, if I wanted to dramatically increase, let's say, the saturation within this orange, it's going to look for every part of my image that represents these orange spectrums and then increase it. In this case, we got our gate. We didn't affect any of the greens or blues or whites in this image, but we have increased the oranges and yellows that exist in like the hubcaps here, or like a bit of the rust on this car, or these orange headlights, or the headlights or the taillights, for example. So it's super, super sensitive based on those colors and within the spectrums that you're increasing. Once again, when we look over at our spectrums that we're increasing true reds and oranges. We're not adjusting yellows. It doesn't appear that those colors in this case, or the color that I increased, had any relationship to those oranges. There's other tools in adjustment layers that also get this functionality. So the one that I outlined to you was color EQ. But there is an additional couple, and that is levels, I believe, also gets the color pickers. So you're going to see these icons now with the levels that allow you to essentially set points on your image. So these color pickers, again, if you wanted to set like a true black in your image, you would set to this area right here where these colors are super, super close to something that represents a true black. So now you can work within levels and set, in essence, blacks, midtones, and white points by interacting with colors that are on your image, versus previously where you just set those points manually yourself, versus you actually using your image to corroborate that information, to tell your tools, what in this case are midtones, what are highlights or whites, and then what are shadows. Obviously, I could still interact with these tools manually. It just adds that additional flexibility of being able to use these eyedroppers. So that represents something like the levels in this case. The other one that I noticed, I think as well, that has it is the gradient map tool, which allows you, once again, to sort of select what parts of your image are representative of a shadow. In this case, what a gradient map does is you're supplanting a color within a spectrum. So in this image, we have an image that's been sort of amalgamated into two things, and that is shadows and highlights. And the color picker tool, when I go to select a color, what you're seeing is the original color that exists before the gradient map is applied. So for example, if we actually just lower the opacity on this layer, so we can see somewhat clearly the original colors. If I wanted to replace this dark blue with a light blue, I would simply click on that field. And then when I run a full opacity adjustment on this image, on this gradient map, that color is now changed to this shadow color, which is that cyan that you see here. So it basically allows you to set these colors in your image using these color pickers within your image. So these are really cool. I mean, I think that specifically the one that exists within the levels adjustment has been highly, highly, highly requested. And I think that's been requested for years. So this is an addition that people have been really wanting to see and should really significantly increase some people's workflows. Before I go on to having a look within exposure and that sort of thing for these color pickers as well, I just want to have a look at some of these questions as we go. Peter asked, can you change the size of the area that the pick tool is choosing? Not currently. This tool is representative of not a range, okay, not a range of colors, but an individual pixel that is represented in your image. So yeah, it's not like you're accommodating for a range of tools. It's just, in this case, the individual pixel that you're selecting. And you can see that actually represented by when you move the eyedropper tool over your image, it really is adjusting per each individual pixel. Hopefully that answers your question. Cal asked, will GPS tagging be included, e.g. click on an icon and a Google Maps open indicating the location recorded in EXIF? Cal, can you send me an email? We do have a map function that's existed within ACDSee for a really long time. So I could probably answer that question over email. Rainer, for your question in regards to the Nick filter collection, also email me. I do believe that there is I don't know specifically in what way that the products interact, but I knew that this was a conversation I remember having, hearing and interacting with about 6 months ago. So please also send me email. I'll get to the bottom of that for you. Marty asked, okay, will new color themes for UI be introduced in 2021? I find light gray on dark gray hard to read. Marty, I do believe if you go to tools and, or rather, let's see here, options, the display, let's see here. I believe that there is a display function, general, that allows you to set to like a lighter color if you dislike the gray. Where is that? I know that 100% exists in here. I'll do that. I will find that at the end of the workshop, just so I'm not taking up everybody else's time. But yes, that is possible. Okay, so let's go, now that so we've sort of outlined the color picker in relation to edit mode, working within as a tool itself, and then also within the adjustment layers panel. But like I said, this also exists in other modes, so we can go into something like, let's say exposure, for example. And oops, that's not what we want actually. We want cancel. Let's go into white balance, color EQ. Where was that? I mean, another aspect of ACDSee Photo Studio Ultimate is that the 2021 is that color EQ and global adjustments within the color EQ filter itself. Just so to illustrate what that is, on the left-hand panel here under color EQ, this whole panel has been sort of remade to accommodate for two different tools. So previously in ACDSee Photo Studio 2020, there was a color EQ filter in addition to a color balance filter. Those have now been homogenized into one unit because they actually, there are a lot of the tools talk amongst each other and work together. So previously color EQ was just these settings that you see here, and beneath it now are these color adjustments in addition to that. So with one specific color adjustment being new, and that is the color shift adjustment. Color shift is kind of interesting because it works very similar to that of Hue. I'll illustrate it right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to color shift this image with Hue, the traditional Hue slider. So when I increase the slider, what it's going to do is it's going to move all of these color ranges adjacently. In this case, I started with an image where my car here is blue, but as I move it further to the right, it's going to move it into the purple spectrum. And as you can see with this orange here, when I shift hue as well, it's going to shift that into the green spectrum, which is directly to the, in this case, directly to the right, right adjacent of it in the color spectrum. What this means, though, is because colors are perceived quite differently to the human eye, with most notably difference between blue and yellow, right? Like yellow is something that is much brighter to the human eye than that of blue. Blue is often perceived as darker. And this is just the way that our eyes perceive color. Hue does not account for this perception difference. But color shift does. It does its best to adjust those things, but keep their saturation and brightness in relation to the thing that is being adjusted. So what it's going to do is it's going to do its absolute best as I increase this color shift to adjust for what inherent brightness and saturation values these colors already had. So in the case of the orange that existed on this this fence post here, that's now quite a bit softer green rather than its hue counterpart, which is quite electric as you increase it. The same is also true for that hue adjustment when you move color shift for the car here. Now this is much more pastel in color, maintaining the car's original light rather than that of this like electric pink that is being approached as we slide that color bar further to the right. What you might have also noticed is that while we're in this mode, we have the ability to interact with the color picker once again. In this case, the color picker interacts with like the cyans and blues while we're in the saturation mode here. I can desaturate those sections, increase the saturation in those sections, now using the actual picture itself, the preview panel, rather, pardon me, than just interacting with the cyan and blue sliders. And I believe that is the case in almost all these exposure lighting and color adjustments. So if I was to navigate into something like, I believe, levels, for example, there's color picker within this function as well. And then let's check exposure, because I believe that some of these modes, yeah, some of them would not have it, but then any mode in this case where you're going to see that color picker show up, like something like, for example, color wheel, which is convenient because it's going to be the next thing that we're talking about. But that color picker, once again, is represented within our image. I'm going to open up a different image to illustrate the color wheel, which is what we're going to be talking about now. But in essence, the color picker has now been added to a ton of modes, either filters or adjustment layers that it didn't previously exist in, and allows the users to manually select based on their actual preview the colors that they're seeing rather than guessing what those colors are using the sliders. Let's go back into manage mode and choose a different image. Let's go in an image that's going to have like sharp variation in color so we can illustrate this. I want to see like bright reds and like bright greens. Let's go into a landscape folder. This might actually work perfect. Let me see if there's a better one. Actually, let's use this guy right here to illustrate this. So I'm going to go into edit mode after selecting a different image, and we'll have a look at this interaction with the color wheel. So color wheel is another filter. It's represented in the left-hand filter panel, which you see right here. And I'm just going to click on this. And this is an enormous change in terms of UI. So there's quite a lot to talk about here. So the color wheel is super cool. I was really excited about the UI on this because I think it really adds a lot to the software, and it's very modern. Basically what the color wheel is it allows you to make a selection based on the colors that exist right here, and then adjust them with the values that are listed below it. So we can choose like blue colors within our image here, or green colors within our image, and then adjust smoothness, saturation, hue, brightness, contrast, and contrast balance. Importantly, we're also going to cover that it's cross-applicable with pixel targeting and also the brush tool. We'll show that in a second here. Let's make a selection of greens in our image, okay, and then talk about how that interacts with. I can move this center value into the green spectrum, and as you can see, as I do that, it's going to start to outline to me what parts of our image are green. As I move it into the blues section, you're going to start to see a huge portion of our image pop off here, and that's because this image is predominantly within the blue spectrum and within the green and yellow spectrum. You'll notice that very little parts of our image are represented by red values here. So our image essentially goes grayscale for us to isolate parts of our image, and that isolation is represented in this case by that grayscale showing up in color. We can also select a color range by using the color picker itself. So if I select blue, what you'll notice is that the ball on the color picker itself navigates to the blue section. And as I lower this into the green section, you'll see that that ball will move once again. And it's indicating to me that the colors that I'm selecting right there are closer to the yellow spectrum than actually to the green spectrum. If perhaps I move it over here, it'll indicate, no, it's pretty much all in the yellow spectrum. But so that I can essentially set those values using the color picker itself. So when I select this tree, for example, this pixel, it's going to move it in between green and yellow. This is really cool because once we have defined a color point that we want to work with, we can actually expand upon that color point. So if I wanted to say, okay, I really like that incorporated that specific greeny, yellow kind of color range, and I wanted to add, in essence, more green to that spectrum, and I wanted to add a little bit more yellow into the spectrum, by pulling these radial markers out on the right and left, you can see that within our preview panel that's now represented by grayscale, we've added colors to that spectrum. So those are displayed to us with color, in that case, in that gray screen. The other thing that's cool about this is, in essence, there's a couple different ways to interact with this wheel. The first one is to select a color manually by spinning this wheel, as you saw earlier when we used the color picker to set the point. The other is by using these like radial bars to increase the range of color. And then the other thing is we can actually address saturations by pulling the inside of this marker outwards. So what I can do is I can take the center of this color wheel and move it further and further into the saturated spectrum. And as you can see, it actually looks that our image is more desaturated, or rather these colors are more desaturated than they are actually saturated. So as I move towards the spectrum of saturation, the selection completely drops off altogether. You can see that it begins to drop off right here. So we can see, and I think this is really cool personally, because I've taught a whole bunch of classes on hue, saturation, and brightness. And by interacting with something like the color wheel, it actually not only teaches you about those values just by you interacting with it in an autodidactic sense. So like I'm learning these things as I'm utilizing the tool. I'm learning about where saturation exists in our image versus how much desaturation we have in an image. So that's how I would, in essence, select a form of our image that is more desaturated. We can also do the same by pulling this bar outwards into our image. And as you can see, as I pull it into the realm of sort of lower saturation, that's when it starts to drop off. So we can select, in essence, more saturated colors or more desaturated colors, which is really cool. So in this case, like I said, we're working with mostly within this realm right here. But let's say, for example, my whole goal here is that I really like the blues in this image, but I think the greens are kind of like subdued. Well, now I have that range, and I know that I want to like only interact with certain greens. So we want to interact with like this spectrum of greens, the greens that in this case are very desaturated to mildly saturated. And then with that in mind, I could go in and then I could adjust these values. So we have our selection of color right now. Let's go in and actually saturate those colors. Let's do what I wanted to do. So I'll increase that saturation bar, and you can see that those colors that we have within this color wheel are now quite a bit more saturated than they were previously. These greens on the right-hand side are much more saturated. Well, if I wanted to maybe like increase brightness as well in those areas, so now I've got a bit more brightness, and maybe I want to slightly reduce the contrast in those just to my eye. I think that looks pretty good. Yeah. So this is only one wheel. The neat thing about the color wheel in addition to that too is I can set these values, but I can also add new wheels. So let's say I really liked the way that this wheel looked like, and I wanted to add a new wheel. Well, I could add a new view very quickly by just clicking on the plus button that exists to the right of that first wheel, or exit off by getting rid of it. If I wanted to do something that was very contrasting to that, which is actually adjust the blues, I could once again start by selecting the blues using the color picker, and then going in and sort of adjusting and adding as we see fit to accommodate for more blues. Maybe I only want to interact with saturated blues, so I would dramatically reduce that selection by lowering the saturation, or rather increasing the spectrum that is saturated that we want to change, and then go in and, I don't know, further saturating that blue. Or, if we want to get really crazy, slightly tweaking the colors of the blue or something like that. Maybe we want it further within the green spectrum than we wanted it within the blue spectrum. So as you can see, you can go in and you can add these multiple color wheels that allow you to impact with different colors. And I think this is like a very intuitive way to interact with these colors on our image. Let's just show previous for reference. So super simple, and then we get some pretty interesting results in terms of our image. Another thing to note, let's go back into our first one here. So you'll notice that I have the second one selected. The way that I have that selected is by because there's this little white icon that exists in the center of that spectrum. And then the white one is now set within the first wheel, so we know that this one is active. I think I can actually turn off a preview of one by clicking on the little icon that exists above it, so we know that now that is it's not the effect is still there, but it's just no longer in previewable mode. But the other thing is I can click on our green, for example, and what we can do is we can actually suggest that we want to the complete inverse of that versus the so I can inverse this selection. So if my selection in this case is green, yellow, and orange, or whatever, I can go in and I can adjust it. I can select the opposite of that. So now you can see that my my color wheel adjusts accordingly. It is perceivably changing the opposite of what we had before. And then we can also preview the mask without actually interacting with those radial adjustments. I can just simply click here to see what is going to be adjusted. Go into the second one here, see what blues will be adjusted accordingly. Okay, before I talk about pixel targeting, let's see some questions here. Some new ones. Okay, Lauren, yeah, or Laurent, there you go. Carl said the color wheel has a nice interface. Congrats to the developers. Yeah, I said that as well. So Tony was our developer, developed this, and I thought it was really attractive. I was really excited about it. Thomas asked, please tell us about lighting, which is important on photo. Lighting, you might have to clarify that point. Color equalization is what color EQ stands for. When we're in color EQ or the color wheel, we're looking to, in this case, balance, adjust, or work with those colors in some way by changing them. Color EQ, equalization, is in the eyes of the beholder. So what that looks like to you might look very different to me. Does ACDSee support blow-up software? I don't know what you mean, but we do have like an improved batch resize, which allows you to increase the size of your image. So we'll talk about that later. Okay, let's talk about pixel targeting too. So all of these functions also work with pixel targeting. Something to also note as well that these adjustments also interact with something like the edit brush. I'm actually going to open up a different image and we'll talk about pixel targeting and the edit brush. Let's get out of this folder and into a different image. What do we want to do with pixel targeting? Maybe I'll work with this bike. This is a good one. I want something that has, oh yeah, no, let's do the car. Let's do the car again. And the reason why is because the car has two examples of blue and we only want to change one of those blues. We don't want to change both. So in this setting, we're going to use the color wheel. We're going to use the color wheel in combination with the edit brush. And the reason why is because we want to impact the color of our car here. We want to change it maybe to like a sign or something like that. But we have a whole background here that is also blue that will also get adjusted in our image. And we want to accommodate for that. We want to not include this blue background. So we're going to use the color wheel to do that. And it's super simple. I'm going to start by selecting my car. I've got a range of blue that I like. I'm just going to increase that range slightly. It doesn't look like I can get rid of the wall in the back without also getting rid of our car. So we know that that's not possible. Let's slightly reduce the saturation. It looks like all of our colors are pretty saturated. So we're going to have to leave that as is. We can reduce the saturation of the blues slightly, but we're working mostly within midtones, not truly saturated colors. So with that in mind, let's just go ahead and change the hue. And as you can see, it's also going to accommodate for that blue that's in the background, and it's also going to accommodate for the blue that exists right here. So we need to make a brush selection. I'm going to click the brush tool, and I'm going to refine what we already have in place, which is this hue change. And I'm also going to make sure that my smart brushing is turned off in this case, because I can just quickly draw it on because I've already made a blue selection with the tool itself. So I don't need to worry about there being any run over for this hue change because I've already done a good job of refining my blues. So I'm just going to quickly go in and gonna adjust that slightly. And then I'm going to just go through and I'll make a quick selection of the rest. There is some intersection right here, so we're gonna have to be careful with this area, but we'll get to it. And I think we want to make sure that's looking pretty good. Let's zoom in and let's brush over this part of the car. Oops, I don't know why it's not being, that must be, there we go. Keep in mind too that ACDSee this is not a finalized product. This is a preview with a product that's still undergoing development changes. So I'm just going to go in and cover that up. And we've done a fairly significantly good job of selecting that blue. And now you can see essentially that I'm going to zoom out slightly, that this car is the subject of our development changes. So when I go and I change the hue to something like a green, for example, I'm not interacting with those blues. The way I'm able to do this is by the combination of this wheel in addition to the brush tool. So again, there's lots of different ways to make specific selections of color in ACDSee. You can use pixel targeting, you can use a luminosity selection, you can use the brush tool, you can use smart brushing on a color specifically. But that was a really quick interaction where I just adjusted a specific color and then used the brush to kind of hone in on that. And that obviously could go alongside with a bunch of different colors in our image here. I believe the brush tools and the pixel targeting, which I could be wrong, I believe that this is a universal application. Let's just make sure. Yeah, that is a universal application. So when I interact with a brush tool, it doesn't matter how many tone wheels I have going on, there's only one brush that we can have active. It doesn't work in essence with these multiple tonal wheels that we have. The same is also true for pixel targeting. So while you can have multiple wheels and those wheels can be adjusting specific colors or saturation values or whatever, we can only have one brush and one pixel targeting active at the same time. So let's illustrate that as well. I'm just going to hide the brush strokes by clicking this little icon here. And let's have a look at tones. So again, these are the values that are going to get adjusted because this is the color wheel. This is the wheel that we're active in. You'll notice when I click on the brush tool, it opens or closes that panel, meaning that it applies or doesn't apply the effect accordingly. Pixel targeting, we can also interact with like individual tones on our image. So I'm just going to move this panel to the right for now, just so we can see this a little bit easier. Let's take the tone icon here, within pixel targeting, and we'll use this icon to interact with, oh, I might need to turn off edit brush. So we'll just interact with the tones individually. But I'm going to lower some of these values. We'll keep all of the colors set to maximum, and we're actually going to reduce the tones. So we have three operations that are running at the same time. We have a active brush selection, we have a tone wheel selection, and we have the adjustments that are being applied to this image. We're going to add one more layer to that, and that is we're going to select specific tones within our image that are going to have that application occur. As you can see, as I increase these values, whoa, that's got some chromescence going on. Looks like a 90s, like Tokyo Drift car. As I increase these, the shadows in this case, right, the shadow bar, the shadows in our image are in this case are what receive that application of that hue adjustment. It's also important to note that that is just being applied to where these brush strokes are sitting. Let's go in and increase the, I guess the midtones here. Let's increase the midtones, and you'll see that the midtones accommodates for pretty much everything on our car with the exception of the roof, and that's because the roof is a very bright color blue that is going to get that that hue adjustment altered to it. So as I increase these values, you can see that our car is pretty much entirely blue. It looks like there's no real meaningful whites that exist within our color, within our car's color selection here. But it's important to note also that you can see your target mask, this little showcase right here, illustrate to you which part of those images are going to be subject to that change when you increase or decrease those tone bars. So as you can see, this is a pretty cool, pretty cool interaction that we have here. We sort of have a ton of degree of control with all three of these tools operational at the same time, being pixel targeting interacting with tones, be it the brush selection tool interacting with this part of our car, and then the tone wheel. Okay. We'll talk about now the tone wheel, which is different from pixel targeting tones in the color wheel. Very confusing, but very cool once you see the tone wheel. I'm going to open up a different image and we'll start talking about that. Let's go with this image. And I'll have a look at some of these questions as well. Okay, Bruce, are there improvements to facial recognition? What about importing face tags from Picasa? Yep, that's in the software now. I wasn't going to spend too much time talking about it today, and the reason why is because it's pretty simple to use. You basically just catalog your files utilizing that information. What I mean by that is you would go into something like Tools, you go into Face Detection, and you would import Lightroom or Picasa face data. That's it. You just select your photos and then import with that information. There's also a way to do this within view mode as well. So if I was to open up a folder that contains some faces or whatever, let's say that these images had Picasa face data on them, I could go to, I believe, face detection and import Lightroom and Picasa face data from the faces themselves. So, yep, it works. So that applies to Lightroom and Picasa, faces that have been added in those softwares. There'll be a more in-depth tutorial on it, but the answer to your question is yes, Bruce, they exist. Brian asked, will the new version load any quicker? Okay, so this also corresponds to something that I couldn't really cover in any meaningful way because there's no way to like really preview it because people's collections of files and keywords and categories are vastly different. But Brian, the largest change to the software in 2021 is like speed improvements. And if you go to the website, there's going to be outlines for absolutely everything that this software does better. But I want to be clear that I'm showing you the visual changes that you can work with in the software. But one of the biggest non-visual improvement that is not sort of previewable really in a workshop is the speed improvements. They're huge. They're all listed on the website. check it out. Okay. And Carl, to answer your question you asked earlier today, this might not be the time, but is there a tool to load and create LUTs? Yes, there is. I've covered this in previous workshops, and I'll cover it at the very end if I have time. 100%. Okay, so let's talk about the tone wheel, which is another improvement within ACDSee. I'm just going to open up this image here. Tone wheel is really cool. So let's first of all illustrate to you, I guess, the gradient map, and then we'll talk about the tone wheel. Because the tone wheel is functionally like a much more advanced version of the gradient map. So earlier when I was talking about the gradient map, I was talking about the color pickers. But in essence, the gradient map allows you to take the shadows in an image and import a color in that area. So as you can see, our shadows in our image are represented by the blue, and the highlights are now represented by that orange. Okay, let's show you how that interacts with the tone wheel. So I'm going to take layer 1 here, and I'm just going to actually bring it up in the tone wheels, which is in the filter panel. Actually, I'll show where that is once more, just so you can see it. It's right here, third from the bottom, or fourth from the bottom rather, under color. So tone wheels are pretty cool. They give you the ability to, once again, supplant a certain color spectrum, be it highlights, midtones, or shadows, with a color. Let's illustrate this. So right now I'm interacting within the highlight wheel. I can change that by clicking on the color picker at the top here, which, as you can see, will change where that wheel, that circle that you see flipping around the midtones bar now, it exists there rather than the highlights with the color picker for the highlights here. So when I click on these, it basically will allow me to interact with different parts of our image, be it highlights, midtones, or shadows. So let's use the color picker. Let's set all of our highlights to this color blue, okay? So I took the color picker and I selected a blue, and let's just really saturate those colors to give you an example. So highlights are now being made this blue color. Well, let's take this midtones now and do something similar. Let's make all of our midtones a red. So once again, I'll click on this color picker here and I'll select red, and I'll really crank the saturation on the red. So all of our midtones are now being made a specific color. And then finally, if we wanted to adjust the shadows, I could click on the color picker and I could adjust all my shadows are going to be, let's make them blue as well. And I'll really crank the saturation on that. And as you can see, I've taken the highlights, the midtones, and the shadows, and I basically added a color spectrum within each of those things. This probably doesn't look like a desirable change, but the thing is this gives us a lot of control over like the way our images look. I'm going to reset these values by clicking on the reset tool, and this goes back to our original. So what we can do is we can also take a color like this, like I'm clicking on the highlight section itself, and I can maybe like warm this image quite dramatically by bringing it into the like orange spectrum. And as you can see, if I just rotate this along the edge of the bar, I'm getting that maximum saturation, which is this bar that you see right here, the saturation bar that exists on the right, moves that ball from the center to the very outwards. So as we interact with this ball, you can adjust not only the color that it's supplanting in that range or spectrum of color, but also the saturation degree. So I can move it further and really saturate those colors. The original is going to be represented by no saturation whatsoever. So let's add highlights. Maybe we make our highlights, let's make our highlights yellow because it looks the best out of all the options. I'm going to slightly desaturate them, and as you can see, I can also make those colors brighter or darker depending as well. So if I really wanted to adjust that spectrum, I could add a darker orange or I could add a much brighter orange, which is, in this case, these colors are already very saturated. and in this case, it's not going to impact white very much. Let's make our shadows a different color. So we could take our shadows once again, and this image was predominantly shadows, shadows being in this range here, and also much through our forest here as well. We could go in and we could make those shadows quite a bit more blue. So I could go in and I could adjust, once again, the saturation of the color that's being added, supplanted in that section there, like that. I'm actually maybe gonna darken this section a little bit more so it gives us access to a bit of contrast that we can add in that range as well. So I can really kind of play around and add a bunch of really unique color spectrums in this range. The midtones are always going to represent the most of our image, just by, unless our image is compromised as a extremely high contrast, then this is going to represent the most of our image. And I'm going to go in and I'm actually going to add a slight amount of red to that as well. And maybe I'll lower the saturation in that slightly. And I've to my eye, I've made quite a desirable change. Whoa, it's almost night and day. And the contrast really adds a lot to this image. I might add a bit more yellow in the spectrum here. Maybe I want this to actually be slightly lower, but that does really appeal to me quite a bit more than the original image. And I can use these tone wheels to adjust these values. So it's not a true gradient map in the sense that you're getting that electric change to your image, but it does give you a significant amount of control over color mapping your image. And this is very similar to creating something like a lookup table or a LUT for your image. Let's have another look at the questions. Okay. Michael, email me about multi-threading, please. I don't know, but I can find out for you. Brian says, why does the database seem to keep loading the percentage value each time I go back into the main folder? This holds 80K files. I mean, the way that the database works in ACDSee is anytime you browse to a new folder, you're essentially adding information to your database. So that might account for why it holds so much information. In essence, browsing is adding things to the database, things like metadata, thumbnails for your images, that sort of thing. This information is loaded while you're interacting with your folder base. Yeah. Gary asked, Adam, first for a small medium company, your product rocks. Thank you. That's awesome. Okay. Hosted software. Our software in particular is very customer focused. Our website where enhancements. Once a year, a company asks users to review and prioritize their top 10 enhancements. Oh, okay. Yeah, I can see where you're going with this. Okay, so we have a focus group that's a part of our web forums. And so they're the people that do a lot of the reviewing of the new product. They're longtime ACDSee users. They're the ones that essentially work and operate within that focus group. And I think the only way to be added to that focus group is by interacting with that forum. But email me if you have any questions in regards to that. Norman asked, when will the new version be available? It should be available at the end of September, tentatively. Okay. How do the wheels deal with face tones? That's a great question. Let's go into a face and use the tone wheel adjustment to change it. I'm realizing this is going to be so much longer of a workshop than I first anticipated, but that's the point. You get lots of really good questions. So I'm just going to open up this face, for example, and then let's interact with the tone wheels. So human skin is, no matter whether or not you're a person who's quite dark or quite light, human skin is always in the orange spectrum. So as you can see, when I move my eyedropper, that it exists within that orange spectrum there. The same would also be true if I go to a woman who is much darker. It'll still be within that orange spectrum. So keeping that information in mind, you will have to compensate for that. So if we were to take, for example, this highlights, or rather our midtones, and we were to move them into the blue spectrum, you can see that the midtones represent this portion of our image right here on this woman's face, versus shadows. Maybe if we wanted to add a bit of purple, it's going to be more represented by this area here. And then highlights, if we move them into yellow, highlights seem to be very, very, very selective on this image. They're almost not present. This image is primarily composed of midtones and shadows. But as you can see, like, this image changes the woman's skin tone in a way that's like very believable. Like, we could understand this image given that there was a bit of blue light or something like that. This makes sense to that image. So once again, consider tone wheels as like a tool that allows you to subtly change the colors that exist within your image, much unlike something like split toning, which dramatically changes them. Okay, let's talk about something that's been a huge change to Ultimate, in addition to other people that have been really, really desiring this change, and that is the rename function. So we'll talk about batch renaming. I'm going to go in and I'm going to quickly just rename these to something, something just dumb, something that doesn't represent anything important, and then we're going to go in and change. So just forgive me as a second as I just take these images and I batch rename them to, let's go title 01, sure. And so it's just going to change all these images now to having a simple title, okay? And now let's actually change these. So this would represent, so you have a bunch of images in your repertoire, in your folder, and they all have a name of, like, it's just a series of numbers or something like that. Or maybe you've gone in and you've adjusted them to specific values. This tool will allow you to do so many things: change specific elements, remove like up to certain characters. You can, there's so many things you can do with this tool. So people have been heavily requesting a change to the batch rename tool, and let's talk about it. So I'm going to go into batch and batch rename, and let's talk about these settings. So how batch rename works is there's these 6 templates that exist on the left here. Or rather, there's these 6 entries that exist on the left here. So the first one is your base template. The second one is search and replace. The third one is case change. The fourth one is insert text, remove text, and then strip spaces. How this batch rename function works is it essentially goes down this list and it completes these as an order of operations, which might sound complicated now, but I assure you this is super simple and interesting to use. Let's title these images. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to add a base template. Maybe I want my base template to just have my name. So I'll just like name myself. I'll go Adam P. Maybe I'm interacting with a folder that contains like tons and tons and tons of photos. So maybe I need like a third number because my folder has 300 images in it or something. Or maybe it has 1,000, I need a fourth. But in this case, let's just go 3. So let's add a template, and let's say it's Adam P. And as you can see on the right here, the current name is being adjusted to the new name. So Adam P is listed there. There's a space, and then there's 001 all the way to 010. What we can also do is we can also actually insert a bunch of metadata. So if we wanted to add specific properties that we found useful, like say the date or the make and model of the camera, or the time that you last edited these files, it doesn't matter. It could be any of these things. It's just whatever metadata you wanted to add. So I'll maybe add the make and model. Let's go under file properties. Let's see here. I think it's under EXIF. Yeah. So I'll open up the EXIF field. I'll go to camera info and I'll add, let's say, make and model. Okay, so I'm going to click these values because I want to include them. But keep in mind, again, I can add so many different things. I could add those 2 things because I've selected them, as you can see here. but maybe also I add, let's see here. Maybe I add, yeah, the modification date or the file type or something like that, you know, let's add the modification date. And then as you can see, it adds those values. So here's the first one, camera info make, it's right there. And then there's camera info model, which is located right there, which is represented in the new name. And then lastly, there's file properties and the modified date. Let's say I didn't actually need the modified date. Let's get rid of that. So if I get rid of that in my template, it then removes it from my name listing right here. You can completely clear your template. You can use letters instead to represent the numbers. So these 3 numbers here could be represented by numbers instead, which, as you can see, indicates now AAA, AAB, AAC, so they'll be adjusted accordingly. I'm going to keep with numbers though. And then allows you to also start your naming convention at a fixed value, which I think by default is 1. Or in this case, I could start the numbering function at, say, like, let's say I started at 500. So it'll go 500, 501, 502, etc. So those values can change. But let's say that all I want for this is I want to say my name and then the camera, make, and model that I shot these on. And as you can see, it's listed there. Let's go now to search and replace. So I could search this title, this new title that I have here, for a value. Let's say I don't want Sony anymore. So I could search for that value and I could replace it with something else. Maybe, you know, like maybe it's, I don't know, maybe I'll just say DSLR instead or something like that. But the point is I could take out Sony and I could replace it with a specific text, you know. I could take out ILCE and replace it with DSLR. So this operation occurs after the templating does. Again, this is a part of its order of operations. So if we want to remove that value, I could take those out. Good thing to note, though, is you might notice that my new name convention, there is no space between Sony and DSLR, which actually means to me that I need to go back to my template, and what I need to do is I actually need to add a space right here. So if I go back to my template and add a space right in that field, it'll go in and it'll add one right there, which I think is really valuable because that makes it a lot easier to read. Let's see here. So we can also go in and then go to our third option here, which is case change. Let's say we want everything to be lowercase. You can see that now all of the text within this, with the exception of the numbers, is represented by lowercase. And my extension is also lowercase. I could change that extension to uppercase if I wanted. So now my extension is capital ARW, or TIFF in this case. So let's say that's desirable. Let's now go into insert text. I could once again insert metadata. Maybe I insert, let's say, let's insert what this is about. Let's say this is about, this was a photo shoot, okay? So I add that, but it's inserted at the very beginning. I can adjust this value by moving this to, in this case, it's added to the beginning right now because by default it's a prefix. But if I wanted it to exist at the end, I would add it as a suffix. Actually, maybe that's desirable. Maybe I'll just add a space there and then that'll add it to my title. Just as a note, I can also add this in at a specific position. So if I go to the position here and then I move that value up, you can see that photo shoot in this preview panel right here actually changes its location in relation to where it is in our title. I can also add it after text. So if I wanted to add in photo shoot after maybe DSLR, oops, yeah, we're gonna have to spell it right though, then it'll be added right here. And then I can also add it before text if I wanted to. Another important note is remove text. So I can, and this has been requested heavily because if you have an old naming convention, right, and you're like, I no longer want the first whole part of my naming convention, maybe you numbered them in a way that you no longer use, but for otherwise the rest of the naming convention works. Well, we can remove text. So in this case, let's say that we added photo shoot as a prefix. Okay, let's add photo shoot as a prefix, and I'll add a space afterwards, and I'll add 0, 1. Okay, so it was like the first photo shoot. Let's go in and let's remove that 01. So it's been 6 months later, and we have a new naming convention. We no longer want that 01 to exist. Well, I can start removing text from a specific position, and then remove it to a specific position. So if I go in and I say, I want to remove it from position 1 up to the next delimiter. Delimiter meaning like a hyphen or an underscore or a space. And then let's just go through and let's start. Oops. There we go. Okay. So we start from position 15. Okay. So so position 11 is just after the word photo shoot, and then I want it to equal 3 units. Actually, maybe I want it to equal 2 units and keep that space right there. So now there's 2 spaces. As you can see, that's adjusted right here. Or maybe I just want, in this case, to get rid of the 0 from it. So I'll go in and adjust that accordingly. So I can play around with these start and remove points and essentially get rid of any element that we don't want. In that case, let's just get rid of photo shoot, and then we'll leave get rid of the 01 and leave photo shoot. And then lastly, we can go through and we can strip all of our spaces using this tool, or we can replace them with a certain function like an underscore, which makes a lot of sense because an underscore would be much more useful to most people than a space in a title, as spaces can cause issues when copy and replaced. So I've gone in and I've made a bunch of these changes to my new name. I can also add more functions. I think it can hold up to 9 functions. So we can go through and add another case change or another remove text, or alternatively, we can take strip spaces and we can have it exist earlier in our operations or later in our operations if we wanted to. And then lastly, we can go in and we can actually save this template. So I can name this template photo shoot, for example. So now that I know, I can use this template specifically again if I wanted to. So I can go in and I can rename all these titles. And then as you can see, they all have that new function added to them right there. So they're all titled accordingly. I can actually go in and maybe I'll go into a different folder, of this food, for example, go through and I can rename these as well. So I'll go to batch, rename file, and you can see that under our presets panel here, just at the top, I can see that photo shoot is listed. So I can go in and I'll just rename all these to my photo shoot preset as well. And they now have that naming convention as well. So batch rename is crazy powerful. It's really, really versatile. And the addition of these strip spaces and also with the accordance of its sort of ordering really gives you a lot of power over this. And also, you can go in and you can create like hotkeys and stuff like that to save specific renames for what, however you want to do that. There's a great degree of power, and it resolves a lot of issues with users wanting to get rid of specific characters from the names of their photos, but without having to go in and individually change each and every single one. Oh man, there's a ton of questions. Okay, so let's take a look at some of these. Shamel, I believe that a lot of the processing speed problems that you've been having have been updated because, like I said, 2021 is dramatic. The biggest change to it is processing speed, and a lot of this can be seen on the website itself. But I appreciate the compliment on the software. Brian asked, after rename, will we need to go to catalog embed pending to embed the new data? The name is not considered metadata. So no, after the name change is completed, the name changes are completed. In rename, what does advanced do? That's a good question. I actually don't know. So let's have a look at it. Advanced. Handle name conflicts. Ask. Oh, I see. Okay, so this is basically going to give you the opportunity. So if it's going to replace any information that okay, so if any of these templating or like these ordering adjustments don't make sense, if I go in and I make sure to ask each time, then it's going to ask me for every instance of a change being occurred. So if I go in and say, you know, like maybe there's an issue with my renaming order, and it's going, and I go to click the rename button to go through that order. If there's an issue, it's going to ask me each time versus it'll skip it or it'll rename the file entirely. So it just gives you some control over when there's error functions with your renaming function. That's a good question. I didn't know that actually. Is there an undo on batch rename? I don't believe so. I think once it's renamed, it's renamed. Yeah. Ted, hopefully that answered your question by going into this other folder and renaming them as well. Can you undo a batch rename? Oh, like, do you want to rename those same files? I see what you're saying. Okay, so let's go do that. Yeah, so what you could do is you could go in to these two images, for example, or maybe these two TIFFs in our order listing, and then rename those files. Well, I go in and you can see that my current and new is right there. So if I wanted to go in and I wanted to, you know, change remove text from this or something like that, or insert a different text, I can go in and I can adjust them accordingly here. So all of this information still exists, and or I could, in this case, I could create a new template if I wanted to. Lauren asked, many software are now using AI. Will ACDSee go that way? They've been sort of working on developing different AI elements within the software. I mean, the face detection thing was sort of like teaching the software how to learn for faces and such. I anticipate that it will go that way in the future. Okay, let's go onwards. So let's talk about batch resize. So we have our images in this folder. Let's actually go back to the food folder and we'll take two images, for example, and talk about batch resize. It's a really simple function. I'm not going to take too much time on it. But in essence, I have two images here, and let's have a look at the sizing. So the first image of the bruschetta here is 5,000 pixels roughly by 3,000 pixels. And then the image that's next to it is actually very similar in size. They're both roughly 5,000 by 3,000 pixels. So I was to take these images and resize these images. I go to batch and then batch resize here. Well, I can go in and I can change based on a variety of different settings. This isn't like a batch rename in the sense that it has this order of operations. You essentially just choose one of these values. So I could change it to a specific setting, 800 by 600, which will preserve it to its original aspect ratio. I could change it to 75% of the original image, or like 50% or 25, depending on you know, how big these images are. Maybe I want them to be quite a bit smaller. I can address print size, which enables us to change like inch increments, width, while maintaining 72 dpi, or adjusting it to something like print resolution, which would be 300 ppi. And then I can change along the long edge or the short edge. So basically taking the largest side of the image or the shortest side of the image and adjusting to those values accordingly. So this is a simple operation. My favorite, obviously, just being percentage, just because it keeps all the original aspect ratio, but then just, in this case, changes the true size of the image. So I'll just go with that. I might even have a setting already made for 75%, but let's just go with 25%, and then I'll resize it. And those images are now 25% of their original values, so they're quite a bit smaller. So these two added right here, this one being 1340 by 898. An important note about this, though, is much like the other ones, it allows, or much like batch rename, it allows you to go in and actually save a preset. So if I wanted to call this 25%, because I plan on using this a bunch, I can just do that. And then there you go. You've saved a preset. Okay. So that is, we've covered the color wheel, the color picker, the tone wheel, batch rename, and batch resize. I want to actually, maybe what I'll do is, because I'm realizing that this is probably going to be 2 workshops, given how much content that there actually still is to talk about. So I'm going to do a little, just, I'm curious what people think in regards to, would you like me to talk about the new text functions, or talk about like refine edge? Or maybe, yeah, let's actually just go through those ones. Would you prefer me to talk about like refining edge as a function, or talking about the new text tools within the product? Yeah, Ted, we'll talk about that at the very end, because I'm sure you, yeah, but yeah, we'll cover the edge. Okay, so I'm seeing refine edge. Awesome. Okay. We'll talk about refine edge, and if we have time, we'll talk about text tools, but I want to go over refine edge first. Okay, thank you for your feedback. We'll open that up in a sec here. Carl asked, on batch resize, can you rename simultaneously? Do you not want to permanently resize? Maybe not. You can't rename and resize at the same time. They are separate functions. Okay, so I love the refine tool. It's awesome. I'm just going to open up this skate image here because this is the one I found it was really effective on, and I'll bring it in edit mode, and we'll talk about it. So all refine edge is it's a function within select that allows you to basically take any active selection and adjust it. So an active selection in ACDSee is represented in a couple different ways. First way being the marching ants. And the second way is when we change the overlay option to a overlay selection like this. To change your overlay selection, you just go to select and overlay options, and you can change it from marching ants to selection highlighted or selection exposed. Selection highlighted is my preferred method of selecting. So I'm going to actually use this one to indicate what I'm talking about here. And then we'll deselect this selection. But those of you who are definitely going to be familiar with marching ants. What I want to do here is I want to take my subject and I want to just run an operation, and that operation is going to be smart erase, okay? So all I want to do in this case is take my subject and remove him from view by using the smart erase function to do that. So what I'm going to do is I think he's going to be fairly relatively easy to select because of the contrast of him against the sky. So I'm actually just going to take my magic wand tool, and we'll make a selection of my subject. And as you can see, it did a pretty good job, with the exception of the blues here. So I'm just going to take his shirt and select that. And with that second added selection, this guy is now very, very cleanly selected from our background. I could do this a couple different ways. I could make a polygonal selection. I could make a brush selection. I could make a selection based on luminosity, you know, in this case. But because I want my subject specifically, this is a method that I found was good. So let's use it. The next thing I want to do is I want to take this active selection, go to select, and go to smart erase. And when I run this selection, what you're going to notice is that it doesn't do a very good job of removing this person from view. And the reason why is because there's essentially no buffer room that exists on the outside of our subject to seamlessly blend it. We get rid of a lot of the detail within the subject, but we don't actually adjust any of the colors to blend it in. So I'm going to undo that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my selection once again, And instead of just running the smart erase on our subject, what I'm first going to do is go to the select function and go to refine. Okay, so I'm going to click on refine, and it's going to bring up this little mode here. And this mode allows us to change a couple different fields. It gives us some preview options, the preview option in this case being presented as a yellow. But the other thing it allows us to do is it allows us to shift this edge outwards. And as you can see, that what that's going to do is it's essentially going to expand the confines of that selection. At its 0 mark, the selection is exactly the whatever pixels I used the wand to select. And then also I can reduce that selection inwards. And if you're making selections of like hair or particulate, you might find yourself using the shift edge downwards in the downward direction versus what we're going to be using right now, which is we're going to dramatically increase the edge, and we're going to actually add a bit of feathering, which you can see by that sort of like ghostly outline that exists in the background around our subject here. So with that feathering applied, I'm going to click done, and what that's going to do is it's essentially going to make a new selection, as you can see here. And with that new selection, I'm going to now run Smart Erase, and let's see how this does in comparison with the previous selection. Pretty good. I can only see like a small artifact that would appear here, and that's probably because I needed to increase the feathering slightly. But even then, you'd really have to strain your eyes to see that. So I'm going to go backwards. Let's just adjust the feathering once more. Yeah, refine selection. Cool. I'm just going to slightly, oh no, that's not going to work because of our subject here. Let's go in and refine it from the beginning. Yeah, there we go. See, it's doing a worse job than the original. And a lot of this is playing with those settings to get the perfect result. For me, I just want to like see a perfect smart erase. So I'm running through this adjustment again. But I think my first edition of it was the best. It caught the most of that hand there. But the point being is that I can essentially use these refine tools to essentially work within the confines of that smart erase tool and further adjust accordingly. And if you have, I've had selections in the past that where what I really wanted is I really wanted to get an effect out of my sorry, I really wanted to get like the effect of my my subject well, I've done selections in the past where I've selected a like an airplane, for example, and I really want to just slightly tweak the outside of the selection because there's this little granular like edge that appears on that selection that I made with like a brush selection tool. So I want to avoid that, and the way that I avoid that in this case is by working within this refine selection tool. And this is really bothering me, so I want to make one more selection, see if I can get a better job of this. Refine edge outwards, maybe a bit more, and slight feathering, just like that. Now, there we go. Yes, okay, perfect smart erase. Just took a bit of playing around there. So what I mean in regards to that is I can use that refine edge to adjust that selection, and then with that active selection, I can make very, very different masking adjustments. I can, a good example of that would be, especially with backgrounds where, let's see if I can find a good example. Backgrounds, ooh, yeah, this was a good one. Where like I made a selection of this plane here, and I found that there was a bit of a edge that occurred along the outside of it. I'm just going to cancel some of these functions here, and we'll have a look at my plane, specifically right here. And I think what I had to do is I had to go in and add a glow to accommodate for a little bit of that, when really what I want to be doing is making a selection and using refine edge to slightly pull that selection inwards, thus getting rid of that fraying that appears. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add my mask to my selection, and then all I'm going to do is I'm going to maybe refine this. And I would pull that selection inward slightly to adjust for that whiteness that I would see along the edge. And we're talking really, really slightly to accommodate for a little bit of that. And so I go like that. It's going to make a new selection, which means I actually have to disable this mask and make a new one. And that one's going to be much cleaner along the edge than our previous version was. And it's going to feel a little bit more accommodated in that space than our previous one. And all I'm going to do now is add a little bit of a FX, and I'll probably go in and just add a little bit of a shadow like I did before to make it feel like it has a little bit of gravity in the space. But I could go in and I could make a selection very quickly. And also with its inclusion with any ACDSee files you have now, you can quickly, like I just showed you right there, click on a pre-existing selection and then pull it into the Refine Edge tool. So that is Refine Edge. Oh, I guess the last thing I really want to cover, and I'll have more time to talk about additional tools in another workshop. This workshop was quite a bit longer than I thought it was going to be. But the one thing I really want to cover that's really important is that the addition of a development panel. So many of you users, especially if you've used ACDSee for a long time, are very familiar with making presets in develop mode. But we found that with our user base, that those weren't very prevalent in the software. Like they were having trouble with the UI, and so we basically completely restructured the UI of develop mode to incorporate a panel for presets, a panel for snapshots, instead of them being like essentially tucked away within the development tools. Now, I've talked about development presets being essentially probably one of the strongest tools within the software, the ability to make a development change and then make a batch adjustment to your entire catalog if you wanted to. But I'm just going to go over it quickly here with you, because this development panel right-hand pane is so much stronger, and allows for a much better UI presentation. All we're going to do here is we're going to take the color wheel within develop mode, and we're going to click on our color purple here. And all we're going to do, literally, I'm just going to change the color. That's all I want to do to this image. I want to change it to like a blue. Okay. All I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to make a snapshot from the right-hand pane versus having to go in from our previous UI interaction. And I'm just going to call this snapshot, let's just call it purple to blue, okay? And I'll hit OK. And that will essentially save this as a snapshot whenever I'm interacting with this image. If I move away in manage mode, we can discard the change. What you might notice is that there's a little snapshot icon that exists in the bottom left-hand corner. This snapshot contains information for this file. This is saved in metadata, right? So this development change, this snapshot always exists, even if I haven't changed this image in any meaningful way. Even if I discarded those saves, I still have access to this snapshot. And the way I run that snapshot is by double-clicking on it, and it'll apply it. As you can see by the history panel, where it indicates that our original image is right here, and then I clicked on the snapshot by double clicking on it, and it ran the purple to blue snapshot that we have actually saved on this image. Okay, cool, Adam, but that's a snapshot that only applies to this image specifically. I have made one development change to this image and saved that development. I could go in and I could maybe further refine this development by tweaking these adjustments that are on the left. But how do I then apply that development to, say, like 6 other images or a whole collection of images? And the answer to that is quite simple. I would save a development preset, which is up here, versus then a snapshot, which only runs on this image specifically. So I would save a development preset by maybe adding a category. Let's add another category. And let's call this category hue changes. And I'll just hit OK. And all I did was click on this category, add category button right here. And then what I can do is I can right click on this, this preset category and then save a preset within it. So I'll create a preset within hue changes, and it'll bring up this dialog box here. This dialog box seems complicated, but it's really not. What this dialog box means is essentially select any of these adjustments that you see on the left that you want to apply to your image. And the reality is I only actually have one change to this image, and that change is the color wheel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unselect everything, and I'm just going to click on the color wheel adjustment because it's the only one that I've applied any changes. By default, all is selected, and the reason for that is because we assume that when you're making a preset that you just want to apply everything that you've changed to the image. I'm just illustrating to you that we can simplify that by just outlining that the color wheel is the only adjustment that we want to change. And then I'm going to do something very similar, and I'm going to also call this purple to blue, just as an example. And I'll hit OK. And where that should be saved now is under hue changes. By default, ACDSee has created a ton of basically default presets for you that exist within the All panel. If you want to add one to your own category that I've created here, being hue changes, all I would do is just essentially, like I said, right click on that. If you add a new preset from the bottom pane down here, that's fine. It'll just add it to the all panel instead of your specific panel that you maybe want to add it to. So make sure to just right click and hit preset if you want to add a specific one. With this development preset saved, again, I don't need to actually change this image at all. I can just discard these edits. And what I can do is then I can say run these development presets on different images. So back in manage mode now, what I can do is I can go to batch, and then I can, for example, in this case, I can go to batch develop, and then now this allows me to develop based on whatever one that I've saved. So if I remember this one in this case, I believe it was purple to blue. So we'll search for purple to blue, and purple to blue is right there. So I'll develop these images that I've selected with this batch development function. Clicking develop, and then it will apply those changes to my images. So batch development presets are not new to ACDSee, but they're restructuring within the UI, and the smoothing out of that UI is quite new. And again, I will suggest to you that that is one of the strongest tools in our software. Like batch developing and making batch presets is huge. If batch rename if the practicality of that didn't solve any issues for you, batch development is a huge one as well that is really valuable. Okay, so here's the things that I have yet to cover, but I want to stop this workshop now because there's a bunch of questions I'd like to answer, some that you've already asked, and then the other thing, it gives me obviously a new topic to talk about within our next workshop. So we did talk about Refine Edge, and we talked about Develop Mode, the right-hand pane. There was 4 tools that I was not able to get to in this workshop, and that was the text on a path, the text frame box, and then the improved watermark and improved crop functions, which we'll cover in a future workshop and talk about more. But now, with that being said, the workshop is come to a close, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to answer any and all questions you have for as long as I can here. And Tom, I believe you had one of those questions that I wasn't able to answer, or sorry, Ted rather. I'd like to answer that. So if you could write it out again, that would be helpful. Brian asked, this has been very useful, especially the batch rename. Thank you for your time. Brian, you're most welcome. Thank you for participating. Once again, all of this information will be available on our YouTube channel, which you can find within the workshop function. I'll try to upload this within the next couple days. Louise, you're most welcome. Thank you. Does batch resize allow a choice of resizing algorithm, i.e. bicubic, etc.? Maybe send me an email and I'll ask that question posed to the developers. I believe it does accommodate for this fact. I just want to check with them on what they consider like mathematically, like in relation to what they think bicubic is. So I want to say tentatively yes, but I'd like you to email me, and I'll actually add my email in here again. aprice@acdsystems.com. I'll just add that. Here we go. And then I want to add it to all attendees. There we go. Dawn, you're most welcome. Thank you. Gary, thank you. Thank you, Andre. I appreciate that. Laurent, resize method perhaps in the options of the dialog box. Yeah, there's definitely more options there than I went over. So if we were to go bring up batch resize once again, let's see what options it allows for. So classic options like remove, replace original files, same as source folder or a specified new folder. It allows you to create a subfolder in addition to adding it to a specified folder. File options, overwrite existing files, it will rename them. Preserve last modified dates, preserve metadata, preserve database options, JPEG compression options. And then resample type. Bicubic. There you go. Yes, so there's resampling in Bell, Bicubic Box, B-spline, Clear IQZ, Lanczos, Mitchell, and Triangle. Okay. Peter Settle, thanks, Adam. Is it possible to change snapshots from manage mode? I don't believe you can. Let me think about this. I don't think you can utilize a snapshot within manage mode yet. Let me see here. Process. No, I think you still have to be within the. I think that would have been a larger change if I had remembered it. No, I think you still have to be within develop mode to adjust the snapshot. That's kind of a cool idea for a feature, though. I'll talk to them about that. Thank you, Cheryl. Susan, I don't know what the upgrade prices will be, but my guess is right off the bat, it'll be very similar to, just because the product was just released, there's no markdown on the product yet. It's probably similar to the standard upgrade price, so the MSRP upgrade price, which I don't know that offhand, I apologize. Email me. Richard, excellent presentation, great update. Thank you so much. Jim, thank you for the great updates. Some awesome new features. Thanks for the presentation. You're most welcome. Igor, thank you so much. You're welcome. Anonymous asked, hi, Adam. Emailed you a couple guys. A way to remove a toolbar commander feature. Even if I went to a task manager, it doesn't show up in the startup option, at least run this feature. Yes, I'm familiar with, invasiveness in regards to this. Can you please send me an email? Or I guess you've maybe emailed me, or have you emailed me, or have you emailed just ACDSee in general? If you email me based on this workshop, there's probably a much better chance that I'll get back to you than if you just email like customer care, because obviously those guys are much more busy than I am in relation to emails. So maybe email me first. My email address, once again, I will just link in the base. It's aprice@acdsystems.com. Rainer, thank you. HDR has not yet been updated since the previous version. So the challenges that maybe that were faced by you by HDR, I think still remain. Please email me though, because I'm not certain about that. So I'd like to get back to you. SFS, will there be a version that will allow you working on 2 different computers without having to recategorize all on 2 different computers, only having to categorize one time? Yeah, this has already existed within the software for ages. Essentially, you just want to make sure that you embed all your metadata and like save down your information into one database, and then you can utilize that same information within a second database. Oh, I think I understand what you're saying though. But you want to like reference, you want to like save both. Oh, I see. Okay, so you're referencing from like you want to save the database in one place, and you want to reference it from 2 locations, so via cloud or something like that. I don't think that exists in the product yet, although you'd have to ask. So once again, I'm sorry to say this so often, but please email me because I can get back to you better there. Yes, the French version will be available. It's generally 2 months after the English release. But yes, it's going to be available, if not a month afterwards, then 2 months after the English release. It comes with the German release. They're released at the same time. So yes, that is happening 100%. Yeah, let's go over the rename, Ted. I wasn't certain how I didn't answer your question though, because I thought you asked whether or not I can rename a rename, and I showed you that you could. Yeah, thank you, Laurel. Anonymous ask, okay, great. Okay. Okay, so let's go back into the rename function. Again, I don't really understand what I didn't answer about your question. So that needs to be clarified from you. But I will, let's go into this folder here, and let's go back into the batch rename function. And so here we are, we've renamed these images previously. We can make a new rename if we'd like to. So that could be by us adjusting our template. It could be by us adding new functions to this. Maybe we wanted to do an additional case change, and we want that case change to exist at the very end, and we want it to be like uppercase, for example. There's a lot of functions that we can add that run this in a specific order. So you asked, use original name of file number and rename. Use original name of file number and rename. Oh, so here's the file number, in this case being listed as 001, and rename. Okay, so I'll just get rid of everything using the number, the file number being in this case listed 001. I could start this whole process all over again. So I could say, okay, well, I want to name this like photo shoot, I don't know, and then with my coworker Andrea, and then begin this process once more. And I can adjust these values. I mean, in this case, we already have a new name. The new name is listed right there. So photo shoot Andrea 01. And then I would have to go through and adjust these values because I might want to get rid of the second verbiage of photo shoot, etc. So I can go in and completely rename it from scratch. I didn't necessarily need to just get rid of Atom P here too, and the make and model. I could just get rid of specific elements. Yeah. So original name, or in this case, if we wanted to say hold that information, so we just wanted to change the numbering, right? So if we had this situation where this the name remains the same, but I want to change the numbering function, and I want to start the value at, let's say, 200 or 300. So now you can see that when I go to rename these images are going to be started at 300 and then 301 as the example. So the name remains exactly the same, but now the number changes. So using the original name and then name of file number and rename. Yeah. Does that answer your question, Ted? Hopefully. Yeah, okay, so Robert asked, got connected late, will there be another session covering this? Robert, this will be available on our YouTube channel within the next couple days. And yeah, we didn't cover the text on a path today, the improved watermark, improved cop. So there's other things that we wanted to cover. But yeah, this definitely will be available to watch. Yeah. Ed Safford asked, will we need to significantly increase our disk working space? In what context, Ed? Can you clarify? Art asked earlier, how effectively can batch resize be used to enlarge small images? Not very well. They're still going to be pixelated at Art. There's nothing you can do about that. When you take a small image and you increase the size, it has to like that information, that data has to come from somewhere. So the result is pixelation. So increasing the size of small images is still going to come with the same loss that you'd expect. There's no like algorithm currently that allows for those images to be like accommodated. Also, those algorithms that do exist, you might have utilized some on the internet. Those algorithms are really bad. Michael, thank you. Oh, for ACDSee saves. Okay. There's a couple things you can do to accommodate for the file size of those. One would be to essentially flatten parts of your images you don't need, but they definitely utilize more disk space than say well, not necessarily a raw image, definitely than a JPEG image. I would say that nothing that I've done here in this workshop really necessarily needs a final non-destructive file type. However, you definitely benefit from being able to save specific files with a non-destructive file type. I would say honestly, it depends on what your workflow is and what you like. If you want to save a bunch of different composition images, yeah, you're going to need more disk space. But yeah, everything that I talked about here definitely doesn't require it. Thank you, Art. How do you get the images in the folder to show up on the folder icon? The folder icon is this icon that exists in the top right-hand corner. And if you're not seeing that, that's probably an option that's disabled in your settings. Donald asked, if you have many different names, how can you just change the file numbers and leave the original names intact? If you have many different names, how can you change the file numbers and leave the original names intact? So what you would do is you would create a rename function that matched your file name, okay? And then you can literally just go in and add those numbers. So if I'm creating a new preset, I would just copy or mimic whatever current name structure that I have. And then I would add the designated numbers or start from the designated numbers at the end. That's the thing I'm actually changing. And then I would just save based on that preset. But yeah, that would be my suggestion, which would be to functionally copy whatever pre-existing structure you already have, and then adjust the numbers, the number being the thing you actually really need to tweak. Yeah. Noel said, a problem I had that when I added my watermark to a cropped image, the watermark was much larger by default. I could manually change this, but make the more sense that the watermark stays the same size. Is this, no, the whole watermark function is completely remade in the new 2021. There's been an addition of relative positioning, and you can like resize watermarking. There was previous issues people had with like making actions with watermarks that's been resolved. All I can say is that yes, this has been covered, and unfortunately I don't have the time to talk about it today, but I will soon in either like a tutorial or a future workshop. But no, I believe your issue is resolved. Thank you, Norman. Okay. We did have a ACDSee free for a while. I'm not sure if it's still available. Use of EDH, unsure. Michael says, really looking for performance improvements in general. Functionalities are wonderful in the product, but I think performance are going down. I'm using ACDSee for 25 years. I think move to its original for its performance aspects. Yes, as mentioned several times in this workshop, Michael, the largest selling feature of this new product, ACDSee Ultimate Professional and Home 2021, is performance increases, which are not something that I can really illustrate to you very well using in a workshop, but are extensively outlined on our product pages talking about what is specifically improved. We also have a video that came out recently that talks about it in more depth. Great presentation. Thank you, Michael. Ted, can you go over my issue on rename, adding file, and Dave asked, once again, thanks from St. Louis. And by the way, love the funky autos you're using for the examples. Oh, yeah, appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, I do too. I'm a big car guy. So. Awesome. Thank you, Ed. Louise asked, of course, and I can continue to use star for renaming with the original name. Am I all right? That's a good question. I don't know. Use star to insert the original file name into the template. Yes. Yes. The answer is yes. Noel asked, thank you, Adam. I love your presentations, combination of accessible language, explanations, and amazing in-depth. Thank you. You're most welcome. Some days it's like there's so much to cover, I don't feel like that, but it's always appreciative that people feel that way. And I really appreciate it. Anonymous asked, or if nothing else, add an option to close it from the toolbar instead of having to go in Task Manager every time I want to close it. I'm unsure about what you mean. Okay. So Ted said once more, can you go over my issue on rename, adding file and REU and use file original name with main in people? Close the pictures. Ted, if I haven't already answered this question, which I believe I have, please send me an email, because I think this might require like a little bit more back and forth than I can functionally do within a workshop. There might be a little bit of troubleshooting we need to do. I do want to answer this question. I think I'm very close to answering this question. Please email me. And once again, I'll just list my email as well. Louise, thank you. Jeff. Okay. I think that's about it, friends. I'm looking at some of the questions that are legacy questions that I had already answered as we moved forward. That'll be it for today. Coming in a clean 2 hours here. If you have any further questions, like I said, please email me. We're going to be doing another one of these workshops too soon. We'll maybe cover anything that we weren't able to cover today. And then in addition to that too, obviously check out our YouTube page where we outline all of the previous workshops. And this will be up within the next couple days. Once I have time to edit down the file and to save it, I'll upload it there. So thank you. And I'm going to sign off for today. So thank you, everybody, and I hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday. Take care, and I'll talk to you within the next 2 weeks, because we'll probably end up doing a new workshop in a couple weeks' time, and I think we have a couple more planned for the end of the month with Alec Watson as well. Take care, everyone.